So previously we were talking about the giants that were in the land, in Canaan, or in your promised land. And I called out a few things, that needed to be dealt with, or the giants that would rear their heads in your promised land. But there was one that I left out, and I realized it carries enough weight to, have its own video. So I'm going to start with scripture and get started. So Joshua 5:2. And the Lord told Joshua, make flint knives and circumcise this second generation. After they were circumcised, they rested until they were healed. Okay, so I'm reading from my notes. So circumcision is a surgical procedure that removes the foreskin. Biblically, circumcision is a sign of God's covenant between God and Abraham. Circumcision also means to be cut off from their people. Okay, there can also be a circumcision of the heart, which is also an inward transformation. And then we have to understand how, that the mind and the heart are tightly connected, okay? And the word tells us this. The word explains this to us. Proverbs 23:7. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Okay, so as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Now let's talk about this giant. And this giant is your memories. Okay. I'm going to give you the definition. The definition is something remembered from the past, or a recollection. Okay, the past can be yesterday. The past can be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, just something remembered from the past. And then Deuteronomy 32:7 says, remember the days of old. Consider years of many generations, learning from your past generations. So the word tells you that there's nothing wrong, with remembering the days of old and considering the years of many generations and learning from the past generations. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But it is when we do this that our memories become a stronghold or another giant in our lives. Isaiah 43:18, the word says, forget the former things and do not dwell on the past. And see, those two scriptures, if you're not careful, they can kind of it seems like they are contradicting themselves, but they absolutely are not, because Isaiah tells you to do not dwell on the past. Deuteronomy says you can remember and consider or learn from the things that happened in the past, your past generations, your grandmother, your aunt, great-grandmother, grandfather, but also not to dwell on those things. Now, I had a dream a while ago, and I was in the backyard of my grandparents' home. The backyard is fenced in. It wasn't a dream, and it is right now. And as I'm standing, I'm looking around, and there are pictures from my family and of myself as a little girl, my aunts, and I think it was my cousins or something like that. But anyway, the pictures were all like pinned up on the fence, and I could literally walk in a circle, and there were pictures all around. Well, this lady came from over to the side, and she said, you're going to have to let that go. And the dream ended. So when I woke up, I was like, well, I don't really dwell on the past like that, okay? But how many know that the man's heart can be deceitful? But God knows what's down in our heart. See, I was raised by my grandparents and my aunt. And I was the youngest grandchild, like from that first generation of grandchildren. I was the youngest grandchild and the only girl. So I had all boy cousins. All right. And my family, all of them have passed away, except for my mother and two of my uncles. But my mother didn't raise me. So my fondest memories are in that house with my grandparents, my aunt, and my cousins. All right. So they were all lined up, and the lady said, you're going to have to let that go. So God began to deal with me about the memories of the past that I hold on to. Okay. See, I wasn't just revisiting the past to learn from it. Okay, I had began to dwell on it, because the thing is, when you lose, family members that are so dear to you, it's like that's all you have left of them is the memories. So you try to hold on, as tightly as you can to that. But what I learned is, just because he says you have to let that go does not mean you're letting them go. You're letting that heart posture that you have towards the things of the past. Because I found out that holding on to, those memories can cause you to become stagnant. I have noticed sometimes that I would just be, like sitting in one spot thinking about my aunt and, things that we used to do as children, and the things my grandparents used to cook, and, just all types of really good memories. All right. I would catch myself dwelling on it. Remember, Isaiah 43:18 says, forget the former things and do not dwell on the past. So when God tells you, you have to allow him to circumcise your heart and your mind. Remember the cutting away, the cutting off of a thing? You have to allow him to cut these things or circumcise your heart and your mind from these things, so that they are not a stronghold, or they won't cause you to be stagnant. Okay. There was somebody, and I won't mention their name, a social media influencer came on, and they were talking about their family, and when they talk about their family, immediately tears begin to flow. Okay. The Lord let me know that this is a sign that they have not been circumcised. Okay. Their hearts have not been healed from the passing, of their family members. And then we have to understand how these memories are attached to grief. The memories that we keep dwelling on allows grief to remain. And that's why it can seem like the passing of a family member that happened 20, 30 years ago, it seems like it happened just yesterday. You have the same emotions. You cry the same tears. You feel the same hurt that you felt the day you found out that that family member passed away. This is something that is holding you up. This is something that will prevent you from moving forward. This is a giant that will show up. It may not show up today, or it may not show up tomorrow. Sometimes we can go a month without thinking about them, and then all of a sudden it'll come up again. Well, this giant could wait until you get into your promised land, and boom, it'll show up, and now you're wrecked. Okay, so it is important that we would allow God to circumcise our hearts and mind right now to deal with this giant in our lives, which is our memories. Okay, and the grief that comes along with it. That this doesn't mean that we are letting our family members go. We're still going to have the memories of them. We're still going to have them. It's just that when we decide to hold on to it and dwell, in the past, and we look around and an hour has passed and we're just sitting in our thoughts. Okay, that's when this thing becomes unhealthy. And I have seen where these thoughts can mess up your whole day, or a whole week. It could really, really throw you off. All right. So God is concerned about you and your destiny, your future. So he's ready to circumcise this thing. Circumcision is a surgery. It is a surgical procedure that cuts away. Circumcision is a surgical procedure that cuts a thing off. It's a part of, it cuts off flesh. We could call it sin, because if we hold on to these things too much, it becomes an idol. We have set up an idol in our hearts. And now we place that thing ahead of God. And we're telling God that I trust you with everything else, but I can't trust you with that part. Okay? This doesn't mean that you are letting them go. This means that you want to be healed. You want God to heal that part in you. You want God to heal that part that if somebody comes in and touch it, it is so very sore that you don't want anybody to touch it. This is a 20, 30-year-old scar that has not healed. And God is ready to heal that thing. So God is concerned about you. He's concerned about our state of mind and our, the way we live our lives, our day-to-day lives. He's concerned about us. And he's not trying to rip our memories of our family members away. It's just that part of us needs to be healed, because we have not allowed him to come in and even deal with that part. We want to hold on to that because that's all I have left of them. Okay. When my husband passed away, it was like I was on a speedy recovery, because I think I might have held on to his clothes for like maybe 3 months, and then the Lord directed me to go ahead and get rid of them. I had to go ahead and get rid of my husband's clothes. Now, I did have there was a lady that I knew she could do, she made quilts. So I had her to make an apron out of his shirts. So I was able to, hold on to that thing. But in order for me to heal, I had to let those clothes go, because as long as I was opening that closet, and seeing his shoes in there, his hat, and his clothes, in the closet, it was going to be like a trigger, and it was going to take me back to when my husband being there and being alive, and it could have affected my healing process. You understand? So we just really have to obey and trust God in every corner of our lives, because even if we don't understand, we have to remember that he knows what's best for us, and he knows what's down in our heart. This is an inward thing, okay? And there's so many things down on the inside of us that we don't know is there, and we have to rely on God to bring those things to the surface so that we can deal with it, so we can partner with the Lord and deal with it. Okay, God wants us healed and set free. Okay, he wants us to live. I come that you might have life, and life more abundantly. And that's what he's doing. That's what he is ready to deal with in your life right now. So allow God to deal with this giant called memories, your memory. Let God deal with that thing. Be encouraged. Talk to you later.